And what that does is it triggers the greatest transfer of wealth that humankind has ever seen.
Welcome to this latest edition of Sense of Identity. I'm delighted to be able to interview today David Newick, the CEO of Arken.legal. David and I have been introduced to meet each other on a few occasions, and we thought it would be great to get some insight for David around his experiences. So welcome, firstly, David, to this podcast.
Wow, thank you. Brilliant to be here. Looking forward to what I think is going to be a great discussion, Paul. And you're right, we've had a beer or two together and met at the odd function. So wonderful to be here.
Yeah, great. Thank you for joining us. Now, Emily added in a few little extra notes here, as she always does for me, bless, our marketing director. She sort of put a subheading around our sense of identity piece, which was mindset to change, digitizing an analog world, which is a good statement, because just if I may, in my crude way, and I'm going to hopefully make sure you do most of the talking here. Arken, as far as I understand, is one of those exceptions to the rules. In as far as I understand, you have a presence not only in the UK but in international waters. In my experience, financial services in the UK has been a bit poor in terms of anglicising in the opposite direction technology. And I know you're very prevalent in the legal market, particularly around the topic of bereavement, as far as I understand. So,
yes.
And when I've watched a few of the podcasts that you've run, David, there's a phrase you've used very eloquently around a topic which makes a lot of sense. This great wealth transfer, which I think is very resonates in the context of the topics that Arken deals with for a lot of legal practices. Before we move into that, just explain the background. So, because of course, as a Kiwi, if I may say, using that phrase, I know you're a passionate New Zealander. Maybe if I can start somewhere. So, how did David land on UK shores from New Zealand? And when was that? What's the story of that journey in the first place, mate?
Well, there's a lot of interconnectivity, isn't there, between New Zealand and the UK? And I guess my story is no different. My grandmother was Welsh. I have ancestors from Cornwall and Somerset, and a little bit of Scottish in me as well. But I get to stay here courtesy of my mother, who immigrated from Wales when she was 9. And as a result, I came over, as all young Kiwis do. Unusually, I was one of the young Kiwis that came across after I was married, and we did 3 years, went back to New Zealand and had our firstborn, Bridget, and then set about starting a business. And inevitably, as you go through the cycle of starting and selling businesses and doing all sorts of things in your professional career. And after a period of time where I bought and sold a couple of different businesses and done 2 or 3 startups, I got to a stage where New Zealand, a wonderful, beautiful place. All my friends and family are there, but I needed to spread my wings. I needed something different. I needed to get out of New Zealand and professionally to go and look for bigger opportunities and bigger markets. And I had a lunch with a good mate of mine, and he said, "What are you doing, David?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking I might get a job overseas." And you could see the light bulb going off in his brain, and he went, "Wow, we might be looking for somebody." And that was a wonderful friend called Lincoln Watson, and he was the leader of a business which owned Arken, and they just acquired it in 2016, and the directors were sunsetting out of the business, having originally founded it back in 1992, and I was brought in to transform and lead that business from 2018. So would you believe 5 years, which has gone by in the blink of an eye? Thanks COVID for that, but 1st of February, and we're hoping
anniversary.
We're hoping to get indefinitely for remain any day now. So you might be stuck with me, Paul. We might have to have one or two more beers, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm always up for that, as everyone will know. But so in terms of Arken's core sort of competencies, because I know things are branching out for you, for good reason. I mean, I understand there's a swathe of legal practices that use the Arken technology to help around this sort of subject of bereavement, particularly as there were some interesting stats that would be, I think, warrant repeat if you can recall any of them around this wealth transfer and just the sheer volume of that over the coming years. Of course, in the UK, and that professional services connection for software, I like to think the UK advisory market has grown up a lot over the years and warrants its own inclusion in that phrase, professional services. So it makes perfect sense to me that, from a financial point of view and a legal point of view, those bodies, those entities need to be able to work together. What is it that you perhaps if you could explain what it is that you do in that sector and how that transfers for the advisory market? I think that'd be useful to the audience to understand.
Yeah, sure. So Arken is a business founded in 1992 by two private client solicitors and one of the very first legal tech businesses ever in the UK. In fact, number 2, I'm led to believe. So the business grew and grew, and really that was in and around a core proposition of helping to automate repetitive tasks, to reduce risk, to make things more efficient, to ensure that things were a lot more consistent in every aspect of creating documentation, which is of course what lawyers do. And of course the parallel there with the financial services industry is that there's a heck of a lot of documentation in financial services as well. And there's also a heck of a lot of manual process, a lot of rewriting and re-entering of data, not a lot of kind of seamless transition, which leads to inefficiencies and frustrations. And so there's a lot of parallels between the legal services industry and the financial services industry in that respect, albeit that I think probably the financial services industry is further ahead because there's some very large organizations that are driving the adaptation and the digitization of the industry, whereas you don't so much get that in legal services. So our core business is to help legal services professionals, mostly lawyers, to automate documentation and to be more efficient holistically in the practice. So we help practitioners create wills, LPAs, any sort of estate planning documentation, trust documentation. So we have an online wills package, and there's all sorts of sort of efficiency tools that surround that. But one of the things that you've touched on there, Paul, which is a really significant change that we're in now, which is only going to accelerate and intensify over the next 20 to 30 years, is the change that we're seeing in the baby boomer cohort, which is of course one of the largest population bubbles ever in the world, matched only by the millennials, actually, would you believe, in terms of size. And the baby boomers are now, the oldest baby boomer is 76. Now,
right.
The average life expectancy in the UK is 81.7 years, and for males it's 78. So what we're starting to see is that the baby boomers are starting to reach the stage where they're starting to pass on. And actually, if you looked at it just in a UK context, and you looked at the increase in the death rate from 2020 to 2030, the ONS tells us that you're going to have something like 667,000, oh my God, I stuck that up completely full. Let's go again. The ONS tells us that there are going to be an increase in deaths. Now, typically we've had 500 to 550,000 deaths per year. What's going to increase is we're going to get to 675,000 deaths. So that's, if you think of it over a 10-year period, the population is about 67 million, about 10% of the UK population. Now that's driven a lot by the baby boomers. And what that does is it triggers the greatest transfer of wealth that humankind has ever seen, because of course the baby boomers have been very fortunate in rising property market, low interest rates, a lot of industrialization, and so wealth has been accumulated.
And I saw a stat, or listened to a stat you'd given in a speech you gave, and I think this is what you said, but just is it 70% of the wealth in the UK is now with the over 50s population, which just reasserts the point you just made. So it's just extraordinary, isn't it?
Oh, look, it is extraordinary, and when you think about it in pounds and pence, we're talking about a truly staggering amount of money. 5.5 trillion pounds is going to transition. Now, that will transition to typically the wives, because the males tend to, statistically speaking, die sooner. Then it'll transition to Gen X and millennial generations. And of course, the influence on that on both the legal services and the financial services world is quite profound, because there's an increase in death, so that means more probate work. It means a need for greater efficiencies. It means that there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of digitizing the legal services industry. And of course, the outcome for the financial services industry is that there's existential risk, but also opportunity, because who gets that wealth? How does that wealth transition? And sitting at the heart of that inheritance is an estate plan. So you need to, if you're somebody who's an advisor, and whether that be a mortgage advisor or anybody who might sort of have a conversation with somebody about wealth or succession planning or planning, typically holistically, you need to be able to go and say to people, have you got an estate plan? Because you need to have one. Now, the benefit for the advisor is, of course, in maintaining that portfolio and having a relationship beyond just the existing relationship that you might have with somebody who is, perhaps in the older age group, and then maybe they're more statistically likely to pass away.
So seeing through into that beneficiary sale, and again, that was something else that resonated when I looked at some of the video snippets. An interesting topic. I mean, again, we chatted very briefly before this recording, and financial services, in fairness, is not renowned for its pace, shall we say, digitally. I think COVID, we were chatting, there's some interesting stories at a more personal level we'll come on to around the COVID impact. And we saw, email, that love-hate relationship we have with it. We saw, the usage of it, the propensity usage of it to soar when people were working, living at home and locked behind doors, etc. Do you think you've seen and will see change? It would make absolute sense, wouldn't it, given the stats you've just given? But in the legal sector, I guess, focusing there, their use of technology and digitization, I guess it's the only way they can cope, is it?
Yeah, look, we're starting to see that already. And let's just take a step back and look at that, because there's a couple of barriers historically to that not happening. Now, part of that has been because typically the way that decisions have been made within law firms has been on a partnership basis, and the senior partner, who's typically somebody who's in the older age group, not always, but typically, has been less likely to embrace technology because they've worked in a certain way for a number of years. And so culturally, decision-making within law firms has been really fraught, particularly around technology and the adaptation of it, by this kind of cultural issue. The other thing that's happening, though, is that now we're starting to see the baby boomers retire from practice. And what's happening is that you're getting this influence of younger lawyers and legal services professionals saying, well, hey, my time's really important to me, and I'm not going to sit there doing a lot of repetitive tasks. So I'm only going to go and work for an organization that's actually on technology. So if you don't have the technology, I'm not coming, because that makes my life better and easier. So we're starting to see that change starting to happen. And look, I think the other thing that's happening too is that we can't get around the fact that whilst there's more business, there is also an influence of COVID, because people have seen now that technology can work, that you can work from home, and you can do video calls with people, and you can be a lot more efficient. And so that's certainly had an influence, regardless of age group. I think people have used technology.
Yeah.
That's probably true, isn't it, of legal services and the financial services world as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, this is testament to that, isn't it, really? I still personally think, I think there'll always be a place for that personal contact, but I think there's a blend now that's accepted, isn't there? COVID, you never thought before COVID that, this technology existed well before COVID, and yet, suddenly we were all able to leap on it, and it proliferated and it's persisted, the work from home culture, all those things. But from an education point of view, I guess, do you, there's a phrase I know people use, I'll be careful to use the expletives, but if you digitize a poor process, we'll call it, it's still a poor process. Yes. So do you think people, as a consequence of having to deal with some of the dynamics you're talking about, are much more receptive to using tech? It sounds like they are. You've seen an increase in that side of things.
Yeah, look, and I think it's also a lot easier now, isn't it, to adapt technology? I mean, the predominant technology is cloud-based. Obviously, Arken is a cloud-based platform, and as such, you tend to have a platform that is used by everybody. It's not something that needs to be customized. It's not something that needs to be built. You just kind of rent it or subscribe to it and use it. So really easy to implement. All you're going to do is decide, hey, yeah, that makes absolute sense and we're going to do it. The hardest bit for a firm is just making sure that they do drive its adaptation throughout the business. And if I look at legal services firms, and it's probably the same in all firms, you're going to get the people going, yeah, I want it. And you're going to get the people go, oh, I could be persuaded. And you're going to get the people who say, I'm never going to use that in my life. And firms that have done best with it are now, to our perspective, are the people who say, you're all using it. Because as a firm, we need to get this efficiency. We need to get this consistency. We need to make sure that we understand that everybody's working off the same page. And as the business grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, we have to make sure that we've got access to the critical thing, which is data. And we can't get access to your data if you're using word-based precedents and you've got it saved on your computer.
And time, I guess, as well. Time is a very precious commodity to us. We'll talk about something on that front in a minute that you mentioned, which I thought was fascinating. But technology, hopefully what it does do is creates the opportunity to create time, not just for the user of the technology, but for the people that benefit from the practices that are, embracing technology to make their processes more efficient. So it doesn't feel like there's any losers. So it absolutely makes sense. Just in terms of that COVID effect. So we were chatting, just getting slightly back to the personal David piece. You mentioned you'd written a book for your kids during COVID, which I thought was fascinating because I think everyone reassessed their lives during that period. You went as far as to write down, I think you said 100 things to tell my children, 100 life lessons. Tell us a little bit about that, because that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So look, the backstory, which I don't mind sharing, is that I was an early adopter to COVID, shall we say? So I picked it up before we went into lockdown, the week before we went into lockdown, and I was pretty sick. And at one point there, I suddenly realised, oh, I am pretty sick. I wasn't just being sick, man. Paul, I swear I was sick.
What a man play. One man play. Yeah.
And I actually picked up my phone and went to record some video messages for my kids because I thought I may never see them again. And I wanted to say, these are the things that I want to tell you that I haven't had the chance to do so yet. And so it's this moment of kind of great reflection for me. And obviously came through the COVID thing eventually. And my kids were coming over in 2022. First time seeing them in 3.5 years. And I thought, what would be a special thing, to kind of mark this moment, and how could I kind of capture that thought that I had when I was, lying in bed. And so I wrote this book. It is called Things to Tell My Children. And it was really, it actually got to 105 life lessons holistically right across every aspect of life you could ever imagine. How to get the best deal when you're negotiating, to, how to keep yourself, your mental health in good shape, and how to harness the power of your mind, and to be successful, and to not kind of take too much notice of what the world around you thinks. So I gave that to them. They weren't too bothered, to be honest, Paul.
They read it.
But it was brilliant for me, so I enjoyed it thoroughly. So I do enjoy writing, and I have some plans for some further books. There's
very cool.
If I ever get any time,
I'm sure the time when that will really resonate, that later on when they're looking in on this and reading those things. A number of people have sort of spoken about the fact that COVID had some quite profound effects on them, not just in a negative health way, but the way they conduct business, what we've already been talking about, their receptiveness to doing things differently, more efficiently, so that their work-life balance is better. I know you're a big advocate, as we are here. This business, and I know you said the same, is it's people. The technology is great. I know yours is the same. but actually the value, the business itself thrives on great people. So that mental health theme is just such a prevalent one, isn't it? Just talking again about the personal David piece, because I can't help but I was talking before about your football shirt in the background there. I know
Yes.
I think you coach in a big way. What you didn't tell my colleague when you were chatting was that you were involved in a big way with one of the biggest clubs in New Zealand. I think you mentioned to me, which is the shirt you've got down there behind you. Tell us a bit more.
Well, there's a connection to the shirt behind me. The shirt behind me is Burton Albion, but yes, like I ran the most successful club in New Zealand for a number of years, and only had to give it up because I came across to the UK. So we've won more national titles, mostly at a youth level, but also won the equivalent of the FA Cup in New Zealand, the Chatham Cup twice. Did that for the first time in the club's 53-year tenure under my watch, which I was immensely proud of. In fact, on my desk, I have a photo of that day. That's how much it means to me. And
fantastic.
And so football is really important to me. All sports are important to me, but football is really important to me because of a number of things. One of those is particularly because of its impact and the power of it that it can have inside communities. So you can bring communities together. You can provide aspirational pathways for kids who desperately need it. And so the connection with the Burton Albion jersey behind me is that when we were running that club, we had a wonderful goalkeeper. In fact, Oceania goalkeeper of the decade, I think he was, Danny Robinson, ex-Burton Old Boy, and he left after coaching the football Ferns, the New Zealand women's football side, and he left to go back to Burton and to head up their academy. And I connected with him again when I got back over to the UK. One thing led to another, went to watch his academy team play, and we ended up sponsoring them because there was a story that really grabbed me, and that was of a particular family, a particular lad who really has a chance. He was a kid with a solo mum, and there was 9 kids in the family, and he lived in Birmingham, and he just needed a little bit of help to get to training and to have shin pads and things like that. And so for an organisation like us, what's a few grand, and yet two kids, and there's a number of them, a few $100 a year for petrol money or for training fees or whatever else can make the immense difference. And that's the power of football. And that's what I love about it, So, look, I still coach. I think it'll be my last year this year. The lads are turning 18, so they're going to all splinter off and do their own thing. We're on for the double, so hopefully we can get that done, but we'll see. And I love that because you get an opportunity to help young men be the best version of themselves, to learn lessons through sport that they can take with them into later life. So it's not just about, hey, this is how to hit a knuckleball and this is where to stand, this is what to do. And, it's as much about taking the lessons of football into life and making better young men or better young women if you help coach women as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and it's like you say, resonates, and I know it's a mental attitude in your business as well. I'm going to jump backwards and forwards a little bit here because there's one question I always like to finish up with at a personal level, which I'll come back to. But just quickly going back to that sort of whole sector of the technology adoption and wealth transfer and all those things. I think given that a goodly chunk of the community that will see this are in financial services, I think there was an initiative that you were underway with in that technology, in your suite to accompany the pro and lifetime aspects of the product, Estgrow.
That's right.
And is that particularly focused around the advisory market? Perhaps you could enlighten us a little bit around that, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, look, it's absolutely focused on the advisory market. So one of the things that we've identified is that legal services and financial services don't really kind of cohabit or exist in any one space other than a very informal one. So there might be relationships people have with, friends at the golf club or whatever. But increasingly, as we start to look at some of the stats that exist around the world, with millennials going to inherit a whole lot of wealth, but millennials only have 25% of them have an estate plan. There's Gen Xers who are the next kind of generation who also aren't highly represented. In fact, only 40% of people in the UK do have an estate plan, and yet all this wealth is going to be transferred. And if you look at, say, this through a financial services or an advisory lens, I get that, because whilst you might want to be interested in offering a holistic customer service, you're nervous about a few things. You'd be nervous about your customer relationship and losing or damaging that in any way. You'd be nervous about having to put time in to become an expert in a field that is adjacent to what you're doing instead of the core of what you're doing. You'd be nervous about having to pick up even more administration and even more kind of rekeying of data. And frankly, it's not something that they want to then kind of deliver a service on, because it gets away from core business. So with all of that in mind, what we've done with Escrow is to bring the legal services world and the financial services world together. And Escrow is a digital platform that enables an advisor to access a world-class estate planning simply by sending their customer a link. That's as much as they have to do, and it controls the whole journey from there, and ensures that they get full visibility, full control of who is delivering the service, where their customer is at with that, and then helps to demystify some of these problems that are created by the great wealth transfer. So that's I don't mind saying, that's a global product, Paul. We've got discussions going on, won't surprise you, in New Zealand. Fancy that.
Yeah.
But also in South Africa, and of course here in the UK. And so that is something we're really, really excited about bringing to market. And we're not very far away from doing that. Watch the space, and I know we'll be talking with you a bit more about that.
I mean, it's interesting, is it? Whenever been involved with the financial services market a long time, and when people talk about someone's statement of the truth in terms of their estate, their will, tends to be, that, because at the end of the day, it's the basis under which their estate will be dealt with, etc. So it makes so much sense as a catalyst to get to know your client, to be frank with you, the compulsions around it. Interestingly, it came to me a minute ago, but in speaking to a legal practice where we have an interaction some time ago, there was a slight reticence to go through and register wills, in terms of, ensuring that those wills are found at the right time. And when I asked the question why, they said, well, because when we interact with our customers, they interact with us in droves very quickly, and we can't cope with it. So it just occurred to me that, again, this is another reason why, technology has to be able to step in and assist around that stuff, or else, traditional processes and practices are just going to fall foul when the customer really needs something to happen and to be done. It just makes sense. But I get it. Just given, I know we've been talking now for incredibly half an hour. It's very easy when you're chatting away to this stuff. So one of the questions I always like to ask guests on this session, because this is a bit selfish, but I've got some profound insight for myself and my own boys. If you actually wrote a book with 100 tips for your kids around things they should be thinking about, lessons and their life lessons. So it's a bit nasty to do this, but if you were called upon to give your younger self a bit of advice, a tip, if you could pick out one, I might give you a latitude of a couple. Is there, what would be the one that would come to mind for you?
Don't limit your ambition. You are capable of so much more than you believe. Anything is possible. Anything, with positivity, with energy and belief.
That's a good one. That I won't ask you for another one, because I think that feels like the perfect place to draw this to a close, if that's okay with you. Really, really grateful, David, for you coming on this session, because I know.
Thank you.
I try not to dig too deep on this stuff, but it's nice to actually get to know the people behind the businesses, because I think people would like to see that. So Thanks so much for your time. Looking forward to working with you more in the future. And yeah, thanks again for doing this for us.
Well, thank you, Paul. I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully we might get to record another one. And yeah, look forward to future business dealings.
Perfect. Cheers again, David. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Paul.